Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation from Bookshop for National Novel Writing Month. We are going to take a few minutes here to have the attendees join us and really just make sure everyone can get in the event as much as possible. With me today are, as you can see, Grant Faulkner and Aya de León. I'm going to go away after a little bit here and come back for an outro after they're done discussing a lot of great tips for National Novel Writing Month and for your own Q&A about at the halfway point. So again, I'm just going to do a little intro here, and then we will go introduce our wonderful guests, Grant Faulkner and Aya de León, for National Novel Writing Month, otherwise known as NaNoWriMo. So let's begin. My name is Angela Januzzi, and I work with marketing and special programs like this here now at Bookshop. And I'm going to pass off to Grant and Aya as soon as I'm done speaking here about that. Again, about 30 minutes in, they'll be taking Q&A from you using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen here. So please note any questions are vetted in real time, and they will try to answer as many as possible, but it is likely not all will be able to be answered. So thank you all for understanding that. Just a reminder, this event is being recorded and it will be available for replay in the future on Bookshop's YouTube channel. First, a word about Bookshop. Every book you purchase, you buy on bookshop.org directly supports independent and local bookstores. Bookshop is an online bookstore with a mission to financially support local independent bookstores because we believe that bookstores are essential to a healthy culture. They're where authors can connect with readers, where we discover new writers, where children get hooked on the thrill of reading that can last a lifetime. They're also anchors for our downtowns and our communities. As more and more people buy their books online, even before quarantine, we wanted to create an easy, convenient way for you to get your books and support bookstores at the same time, especially from those stores whose e-commerce capacity and or inventory space we can help supplement. As a standard, we at Bookshop always encourage customers to buy books directly from a local bookstore whenever possible. And if for some reason you cannot do so, you can come to bookshop.org. You find your local bookstore and more stores on our map on our website, and they'll receive the full profit of your order. Otherwise, your order will contribute to an earnings pool that will be evenly distributed among independent bookstores, even those that don't use Bookshop. So we also support anyone who advocates for books through our affiliate program. And you can find more about that on our website, bookshop.org as well. It pays 10% commission at every sale, so it gives a matching 10%, not just to the independent bookstores in our pool, but also to you, the affiliate. If you're an author, a website, a magazine, have a book club, an organization that wants to recommend books, anything similar to that, you can sign up to be an affiliate for free. You start your own shop/page, and you're rewarded for your advocacy of books. We want to give back to everyone who promotes books, authors, and of course, independent bookstores. And by design, we give away over 75% of our profit margin to stores, publications, authors, and others who make up the thriving inspirational culture around books. We hope that Bookshop can help strengthen the fragile ecosystem and margins around bookselling and keep local bookstores an integral part of our culture and our communities. Bookshop is a B Corp, a corporation dedicated to public good. As we record this here on October 7th, 2020, there is a televised vice presidential debate tonight starting later after this event. So you can think of this as a compliment or an antidote to that, or both, whatever you prefer. So now for our introduction of National Novel Writing Month and our accomplished guests today. We're so grateful to have them both here, and the reason you're all here too. About National Novel Writing Month. National Novel Writing Month began in 1999 as daunting but straightforward challenge to write 50,000 words of a novel during the 30 days of November. NaNoWriMo is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides tools, structure, community, and encouragement to help people find their voices, achieve creative goals, and build new worlds on and off the page. NaNoWriMo believes in the transformational power of creativity. NaNoWriMo also runs year-round programs across 640 regions around the world and in thousands of classrooms, and empowers nearly 500,000 people to access the power of creative writing, all of you watching right now included. So without further ado, all right, let's introduce our talented authors and NaNoWriMo experts whose books you can purchase on bookshop.org via the webpage Zoom will share at the end of this event, and in the thank you email to all live attendees today as well after this. So here we go. Grant Faulkner is the Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month and the co-founder of the 100-Word Story. He's published 2 books on writing, again, which you can get on bookshop.org. Pep Talks for Writers, 52 Insights and Actions to Boost Your Creative Mojo, and Brave the Page, the Teen Writing Guide. His essays on creativity have been published in the New York Times, Poets and Writers, LitHub, Writer's Digest, and The Writer. He also somehow also hosts Right Minded, spelled WRITE, a weekly podcast on writing and publishing. And Aya de León, everyone, teaches creative writing at UC Berkeley. Kensington Books publishes her award-winning Justice Hustlers feminist series, including Side Chick Nation, which was the first novel published about Hurricane Maria. In December, Kensington will also publish her first standalone novel, A Spy in the Struggle, about FBI infiltration of African-American eco-racial justice organization. So good. This year, I also published her first children's chapter book, Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, about fourth grade girls confronting the president's sexism with newfound superpowers. Aya's work has also appeared in Ebony, Vice, The Root, Bitch Magazine, Catapult, Electric Lit, and Plowshares, as if all that weren't enough. Aya is at work on a Black Latina spy girl series for teens called Going Dark. And she says she would have never managed to publish 6 books in 5 years without the help of the NaNoWriMo process. So thank you all again so much for joining us. Thank you for considering purchasing Grant and Aya's books from Bookshops and the links we share after. And Grant and Aya, thank you both so much for being here again. So you're going to discuss your own experiences, your top tips. 30 minutes in, audience, you can start submitting Q&A using the Q&A icon below. And I will see you all again in about at the end of the hour for our outro. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, thanks so much, Angela. Wonderful to be here. I've been impressed with Bookshop since you all launched, which I think was like last, I don't know, February or something. You guys have grown so much, and we're really happy with all you're doing to celebrate NaNoWriMo this fall. And I'm super happy because I'm here with Aya de León, who I love talking to in any capacity, but especially about writing. And I just can't take my eyes off of these wonderful book covers behind her.
I know.
They're full of drama and colorful, and I don't know, there are many things. And hopefully everybody's novels, all of you who begin novels this month will write to those book covers. But I thought we could kick things off. You know, it was great that Angela gave a little definition of NaNoWriMo. I hear so many people say different things about what it is. And so I thought we could kick things off, Aya, by you know, tell a little bit about what it is to you, but how would you describe it to someone if you were trying to convince them to do it? Like, why should a writer do NaNoWriMo this year?
Right. Well, for me, NaNoWriMo has become a way of life because I've been on this genre clock and have had to produce a book a year, sometimes a little more. And so only through NaNoWriMo have I been able to like jumpstart the process. I mean, I think it's really different for different people. For folks who haven't ever written a book, NaNoWriMo becomes this moment of like, you know, jumping off the diving board, right? Just this opportunity to like leap over all of the angst and questions and just do it. So, you know, what I always tell people is it's just writing 50,000 words of a novel in a month by breaking it down just mathematically to, you know, like 1,675 words a day. And, you know, I always quote your fabulous slogans like no plot, no problem, and quantity over quality. And it's just this method for outwitting our inner critic and getting the words down. And the other thing that I just always think is so critical about NaNoWriMo is like writing can feel so isolating, especially in the pandemic, right? But at the times, and I've been known to do NaNoWriMo at any time of the year. I'm involved in a NaNoWriMo right now, even though it's October. But there's something about knowing that all over the country and really all over the world, people are doing this too. You know, and if you're on social media and you hashtag NaNoWriMo, there are just all these people doing it. So there's something about the existential loneliness that it also really undercuts during that time of the year. So those are the things. Those are some of the things I would say.
Those are perfect. That you hit every mark on my list right there. So I don't have much to add, but I will say that I think the quantity matters. You can find quality through quantity, put it that way. I think that that's sometimes people, they don't trust that. They think that writing has to be, the more ponderous and slow it is, the more you grapple with your inner editor, the better your prose. And there's a time to grapple with your inner editor, of course. But I think in that first draft, that exploratory draft, it's really important just to move forward and to trust in the exploration and to follow your instincts and to follow the mystery in the air, I guess. And I'll just say why I did NaNoWriMo the first time I did it. And it was because I wanted to shake up my creative process. And I think that NaNoWriMo is fundamentally a creative experiment, and it's open to all sorts of creative experimentation. And so I was one of those writers who was kind of paralyzed. I would write the first chapter of my novel, and I would just have to get it so perfect before I could move on. And I kept going back to it to tinker and tinker and tinker. And what I found is that I wasn't exploring the story. I was just like trying to perfect the first chapter. And when I did reach the end of the novel and would go back to revise, I would inevitably cut that first chapter or I would change it, you know? So all of those hours of labor didn't necessarily move the novel forward too much. And so I always quote Joyce Carol Oates, who said, "You don't know the first sentence of your novel until you've written the last sentence." And I think by that, she does mean that you've got to explore that whole journey, and then you go back, and that's when you invite the inner editor in to write. But I'm glad you brought up all the community aspects too, because I think I always say it takes a village to write a novel. Just a lot of writers don't sort of recognize that in the act of doing it. Well, I'm curious, since I shared my first time of doing NaNoWriMo, tell me about your first time. How did you discover it? Why did you do it?
Oh my God. Well, so I had a book that I was desperately trying to get an agent for, and I also had a baby at home.
Oh boy.
And I was really in despair, like, oh my God, you know, I had gotten my book almost to the point of getting into the industry, but I hadn't gotten in. And now I had a baby and I couldn't just sort of hustle and write and write and write like I always had. And I thought, oh, it's just not going to happen. And and I had been a spoken word artist and a hip hop theater artist and had a writer's life. And I just thought my writer's life is kind of over. But NaNoWriMo came around that I had heard of, in the wind previously. But, I've always been a pretty productive writer, so I didn't feel like I needed it. But, my daughter was maybe just a year old and NaNoWriMo came around, and I convinced some friends to do NaNoWriMo with me. And we'd meet in this cafe in Oakland every Sunday, like we'd scrape together the childcare. We were all parents, and it was glorious. It was glorious. And the other thing that was really sweet about it was because NaNoWriMo is so accessible, I got my partner and people I knew who had always said they wanted to write, and we all did it together. I barely got 10,000 words down. Like I was, sleep deprived. I couldn't get it together. I remember one day I was teaching. I'm a working mom with a baby. I was standing in front of my students. I was so tired. I couldn't finish a sentence, and I just started laughing, standing up at the blackboard because I couldn't. I was so inarticulate. I just laughed, and I said, "Yeah, I've been doing this novel thing. I don't think I can keep doing it because I'm just too tired." But it was great. It was great, and it just was this way of being in community again. And that was lovely. I don't think I was even on social media yet, so I just had to have friends in real life.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful. And then, the next year I figured out how to the following year I actually figured it out and got to my 50,000 in the 30 days. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me to tell people, when you said you only got 10,000 words, that's still a lot of words. That's if you multiply 10,000 by 12, since we've been doing math with writing here, a rare thing, but it's very meaningful. 10,000 words a month is 120,000 words a year. That's two pretty good sized novels. So I want people to invite them in. And even if you think you only can write 10,000 words in a month, go for it. And you might write 10,000 that might lead you further than you thought you would go. When you were talking, well, I want to share two stories. They're two of my favorite stories about writers and busy writers, because that's the number one thing I hear from people is that they're too busy to do NaNoWriMo. And both of them come from Toni Morrison. And I was so inspired by her when I had kids, because she, I think she had one or two kids. Anyway, she was a single mom working in New York City. And she would, after coming home from a day of work and making dinner and helping them with their homework, she had about 15 minutes or so at night before she went to bed. And she would use that 15 minutes to write or she'd wake up early sometimes too, I think. But anyway, the point is that she used these small chunks of time, and they weren't necessarily the best chunks of time for her imagination to write. And all of those increments built up into something big, obviously. And so I love that story, because as a parent, you need to take all those nooks and crannies that are available to you. And one of the first times I met Aya, we were doing a webcast like this, but we had interludes between the shoots. And every time we had an interlude, I would get out my phone to doom scroll, and you would hit it. You'd be like, I'm writing. I'm using this time to write. So I was really impressed. And I think NaNoWriMo teaches you like time management techniques like that.
Yeah, and I have to say, as a parent, like I was always the parent, you know, at the gymnastics class in the corner on my laptop. I was the parent, you know, like in the Bomba Puerto Rican dance class, like on my laptop. Because with parenting, there are all these little, there are these little tiny awkward spaces, you know, and I just would bring the laptop and make it work in the car, you know. And I think that, and NaNoWriMo, part of it is like, you know, some of these times, when you're writing, it's not your best work, right? You're just kind of blah, blah, getting the words on the paper. But NaNoWriMo gave me permission to really value that mediocrity, right?
Yeah.
That really mediocre first draft, or, you know, or as Annie Lamott says, you know, the bleep first draft. And that has been really important for me to value that. And I think that that's the other thing for me, now that I've written a number of novels, right? I have 4 Justice Hustlers novels out, and then this other spy novel coming out in December. And, you know, and I've worked on other novels as well. And the thing that I know now is that there's a period into the process where you have this mess, you know, and it's just, the novel's a mess. And I am learning to be excited about the mess, because I've gone through it enough times to know that I get this thing out that's a mess, and then I start editing it, and, you know, 3 drafts later, I'm really going to like it. And I can trust that now in a way that I couldn't. Like, I used to always despair, like, oh no, will this ever be good? You know, and now I know, like, if I keep revising it, yes, it will, even though it's really not good now.
It's super hard to trust that. I still have a difficult time trusting it. But you're right. The more you write, the more you do trust that this is going to be, I like how you said, a mediocre first draft, not a crappy first draft, because usually it's called a crappy first draft or something you vomit up. And I don't like that as an image. So I like that you get a mediocre rough draft out of it. That's really cool. And I wanted to, and thank you for mentioning the messiness too. I think a lot of people, this is what we find. This is one of the principles of NaNoWriMo actually, is that we all have our favorite books, writers who we aspire to write like, and sometimes we'll start writing, and like I was saying, that first draft is so far away from that perfect book that we've read. And the thing is that with those books is that we don't see how many drafts went into that. I mean, 10, 20 drafts sometimes, help with editors, you know, just an amazing amount of time goes in to write those great books. So you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to get the words down on the page in order to edit and revise and get them to that level. You know, I actually, this morning, I've been grappling with what to write about this year. And I think this year, I don't know, this year is such an odd year, obviously. And so I think maybe the question of, this is the time of the month that a lot of people are like, do I have a novel to write about? What ideas do I like? Or sometimes they have 3 or 4 ideas to choose from. I just read this quote from Stephen King, who said, I believe stories are found things like fossils in the ground. And I was wondering, do you find your stories like that, or how do you go about choosing what to write about?
You know, that's such a good question. I mean, one thing that happens when you're a little further along in your career and your relationship with your publishers is now I'm writing the book that I agreed a year ago with my publishers that I would be writing, right? So, yeah. And actually, one of the challenges that I'm having with the novel that I'm working on now is I'm sorry that it's not a more paranoid novel. You know, like these are such paranoid times. I remember at the 2016 election, I was working on one of my teen spy novels, and it was a really paranoid time in the novel. And like right after the election, so many people I knew were like, oh, you know, like I can't write. I'm so, you know, freaked out by the state of the country. And because I was at a paranoid place in my novel, it was a great place to be writing into, like, you know, the family was on the run. you know, and so right now I'm writing this novel that's not paranoid enough, you know, and I can't, it's not, you know, it's on deadline. It's past due with the pandemic. So I think one piece of advice that I'll give to people is to write something that fits the emotion that you're having, right? So like if, you know, this is a tense and paranoid time, so if this November you have a tense and paranoid novel, pick that one. Or, you know, that's more of a homeopathic cure if you're somebody who wants you know, or pick the fantasy escapist novel that's going to get you out, right? You know, so I think that would really, I think my advice would really be based in mental health. Like, pick whatever is going to be the place where your mind can go during the month of November. That's my thought.
That's really a good advice. Like usually I do say to write the novel that's calling you or that's really speaking to you the most, because I think it is, you're going to be emotionally living with this novel for at least a month and perhaps longer if you want to pursue it for a long time. And it really does become like a partner, like a deep relationship, like a family member.
Yeah.
And you want to wake up and be happy to see in that, exactly as you put it, I think, in that emotional space where that's where you want to be, that's what you want to explore. And I have talked to a lot of writers have really had a tough time writing during this time, whether it's just distracted or their emotions are all over the place, right? And you can be overwhelmed one day. And so, I was just, you know, and which has brought up the question a lot, I think, of is writing important in a really troublesome time like this? And I'm curious how you've dealt with that, because I know you're an activist also in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, you know, I think so many of us are very worried. Our world is in deep, deep crisis. It's in deep, deep crisis at so many levels. The crises are all interlocking, and, you know, the threats that we're up against, whether it's the climate crisis, our electoral crisis, you know, this sort of threat of fascism and authoritarianism, you know, these threats are really significant. And so in those moments, you know, I think we all wish that we could single-handedly, like as some superhero, have some response. But really the only response to all of these threats is our political movements, is voting and our political movements. So to the degree that we're participating in political movements, that's really good and really important. And to the degree that we're voting and supporting voter mobilization efforts, that's really important. And I think it's also important for us to write. I think it's important for us to write, and it's also important for us to write. I know for me, I'm just starting to slow down, but I was sort of frantically prolific, you know, in a sort of manic way early on in the pandemic. And I think for me, I'm at a place in my writing career where, you know, I've developed the chops that I can kind of say what it is I want to say. And so writing for me is a place where I go that I have a lot of control. I have a lot of control. You know, I'm interacting with a group of people. There's a story. I get to decide how it goes, right? Out here in the world, the pandemic, the election, the climate crisis, I have a lot less control. So for me, writing is a place I wake up in the morning and I go eagerly to my desk to get into the story, because it's this place where I'm the boss. And, you know, and it's also a political place and there are characters that I care about. And so it's a place of refuge for me. But, you know, writing certainly was not always a place of refuge. But, you know, you get those 10,000 hours in, you develop that sense of deep relationship with your voice. And so now it has been. And so I think that's important to figure out like what writing is for you and to be gentle with yourself, whatever that means. But I do think that writing is important. I do think that stories are incredibly important. And I do think that stories are part of our long game and our long vision of what we want in the world. And the other thing that I just think is so important in terms of stories, and I've thought about this with the climate crisis, and I'm thinking about this with the electoral crisis as well. You know, you think about the hero's journey, you know, and it's, you know, the myth about it is like people have been telling these same stories in every culture, you know, for so long, that it's like this person and they're alienated in this group of people, and it's like, oh, it feels like it's all hopeless, we're not going to make it, but then they figure it out and they band together and they get to the next, you know, they get through it. And I'm like, well, if we've been telling ourselves the same story for 1,000 years, like, this is the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the time where we decide that we're going to put aside our hopelessness and we're going to believe in ourselves and we're going to fight. And I think that that's the story we have to be telling right now about where we are in this country, where we are in the world, where we are in the climate crisis, that this is the time for us to be that protagonist, to find that heroicness within us and to band together and fight. You know, I mean, I think about the election. I'm certainly worried. I'm certainly anxious, but I'm also really clear that we do have a lot of power here. You know, we have the power to fight here. And at every juncture, you know, where kind of authoritarianism consolidates power, it'll get harder to fight, but we always have options to fight. And right now, we got to be fighting like hell for this election to make sure that we mobilize the vote, that people vote despite the pandemic, despite the threats around, you know, the different swing states where there's all kinds of nasty voter suppression going on. You know, this is the time to fight. And I feel like those are the stories that we've been telling, and those stories have been preparing us for this time.
Yeah, that was perfectly said, because I think, I always think, you know, we make meaning of the world, we make meaning of ourselves, we make meaning of our connections with others through stories. That's just who we are. We're wired to understand things through stories. And so I think in times like this, even though sometimes the stories can seem trivial, I think it's the opposite. I think that they're more important than ever. And thank you for bringing up the hero's journey, because I think that's the perfect example. Like, the world has been through a lot of stuff in the past. And we look to our stories to understand what we've been through, but also to point to the future. So yeah, thanks for that. Going back to because I want to address the questions, and one of the questions that comes up with NaNoWriMo, or I hear very frequently, and so just to prepare people to write in the nuts and bolts and things, is there's this whole conversation about whether one should plan your novel or how much you should plan your novel. Like I've heard of authors who write 20 or 50 page outlines, which astounds me. That works for them. I know it won't work for me. On the other hand, we have people who literally show up at midnight on October 31st. They do not know what they're going to write, and their fingers hit the keyboard and they just flow. They're the no plot, no problem people. I think you're an outliner, if I remember right. Is that right? Why do you outline?
Yeah. Well, part of why I outlined was that the first year I just stumbled around and could not, and I couldn't finish, in part because I was, you know, spending a lot of time of my writing time during NaNoWriMo kind of trying to get my bearings. And what's worked for me is, you know, in 30 days coming up with sort of 30 scenes or 30 chapters where I know what's supposed to happen. For me, it's about where I put my mind. So for example, I name all the characters as part of the outline, so I don't have to think about, oh, what's this person's name? And if I add a new character, I don't name them. I just put XXX. Like, that's my generic placeholder for anything. They walk into a restaurant, it's called the XXX, you know. There are just all these triple X's in my manuscript because I don't want to be bothered with shifting from the sort of like plot engine moving forward to thinking about these little details. Or for example, right now I'm writing this sort of hip hop novel love story thing. And there are times where there are rap lyrics and I just put lyrics because I don't want to shift my mind into that poetic space right now because I'm just trying to grind out the plot engine. So for me, that's really been a key thing, deciding ahead of time what's supposed to happen in the scenes. And so I'm a super duper outliner because I have the whole thing laid out. It's usually, I don't know, maybe 10 pages or less, but it's sort of like, this is what happens in this scene. And then there are always surprises, and the surprises are great. And sometimes they lead me to add scenes, delete scenes, combine scenes. But for me, as someone who is a plotter, it's really about having my mind doing one thing at a time and not having to do other things, because that slows me down. And also some of my books, you know, are kind of steamy. They have a bunch of sex scenes. And I usually, that also is a different mindset. So usually when I'm writing about, I'll be like, they have sex, like that's all I write. And then one day I'll go through and write all the sex scenes because I'm sort of in that steamy mindset. And really that's the thing for me about NaNoWriMo, is having my mind in one place at a time so that I can really get that momentum, because it's the transitions between different mind states that slow you down when you have those velocity changes.
That is so fascinating. I don't think I've heard anyone explain it quite like that. Like kind of, you're essentially maximizing your efficiency, right? You're segmenting your brain into like, okay, now it's like sex scene time, or now it's like plot time, or whatever, you know. That is so cool.
Yeah, or now it's like naming things time, you know, because part of that is coming up with your imaginary world. Who are these people? You know, like I have usually imaginary things in the world, like there's a venue and there's a movie that came out and there's a bunch of rappers and there's some problem, you know, like whatever. That naming is a different mindset. So I'll just be like, what are all the things that I need to name? And I'll put them all on one page and do that. That generative space, I'll do that all at once. For whatever reason, that's how my mind works, and it works for me.
I might try that technique this time. I was going to say, I think I started out more in the pantsing camp when I was a very young writer. And every year I become a little bit more of a planner. You know, I'm somewhere right in between, I think. Like I do something that approximates what you do, but I'm still a little bit leaning into the pantsing side. But I do have, I find it good to have a direction. And I think like you, not to hit that, because a lot of times people hit the wall in week or two of NaNoWriMo, and they rush out and they're so exuberant and happy about their story and everything's going well. And then like day 10, they run out of ideas and they don't know where it's going next. And I think it's like what you were saying, they have to use a different side of their brain for that. And it's just a different way of thinking, I guess. But so, yeah, I kind of map it out like you do. I like to know basically where it's going, certainly through the first and second act. The third act is always a little fuzzier for me, I think, but I have a direction for that. But the one thing I've never done, I've never written a series. And so I'm curious, do you, I don't know how this went with your publisher, but would you recommend if somebody was starting a series now to outline the whole series, or do you just outline one book and go from there?
Oh, you know, I wouldn't recommend that you outline a whole series, because unless you're someone who already has a publisher who wants to buy it, right? Because there's no guarantee. So with my series, I started with one book. We tried to sell it. You know, we had a couple of really short descriptions of other books that could follow it. And we did sell it to a publisher that wanted a series. And then they wanted the second book 10 months to come out 10 months after the first book. So that was the first time that I really did NaNoWriMo at a random time of year too, kind of under the gun. But it's great. And the thing that was really great for me about NaNoWriMo, once I had developed a series, is that the first book in the series established the formula and the structure. Like I write these feminist heist novels, and they've got a heist, and there's like the whole heist plot, and then there's a romance, and there's a whole romantic arc, and there's family drama, and then there's a family drama piece. And so once I had developed the template, it was great for NaNoWriMo. I just needed to plug in the new character and the new plot and the new family drama and the new romance. And it really allowed me to write quickly, and I had to, because the books were coming out 10 months, 11 months, 12 months apart.
Yeah. I'm going to switch to we have great questions here, and I want to make sure we can get to most, if not all of them. And this first one comes from Naomi Williams. And Naomi asks, can you advise a gal who's built a whole life and already written one book as a slow, meticulous writer on ways, oops, the question disappeared, on ways to, it's going to another channel here, on ways to get into the less perfectionist, more fast-paced mindset of NaNoWriMo? What would you tell Naomi, Aya?
Well, the first thing that I would say is it's not about, it's not a hierarchy or a fight between these two ways of being, right? It's really about having more than one way you can be. It's like some days you walk to work, some days you ride your bike, some days you take the bus, some days you drive in a car. They're all really legit, and having a bus pass and a bike and a good pair of sneakers means that you have options. And so what I would say is try NaNoWriMo and see what you learn. See what you learn about yourself, see what you learn about your writing experience. I think it's great, and it's great just to have different ways of being. And for me, it's great to have this like blah way that I can just move forward and generate a whole lot of stuff. But I need that meticulousness, that, you know, the need to have those skills that you've developed. You'll still need those skills, and you'll certainly need them in later drafts. So I would say, yeah, I'd say try it, see what it's like. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable. Like for the meticulous people, it feels like, but this is so bad, but this is so bad, you know. And it's one of the things that's great is being able to embrace the mediocrity, right? And there's just a lot of personal growth for me about, you know, the ways that I feel pressure on myself that everything's just got to be so, you know, brilliantly good all the time. It's lovely to be able to write, and it just doesn't have to be that. And maybe eventually it'll become that, and then trusting that it can be, but having permission for it to just be like, mediocre.
I think the word permission is really key there in mediocre. And Naomi, I'd also say, yeah, per what Aya said, I do think it's like you're working two different muscles, and they're not exclusive. You just want to work them both to have them both be strong, perhaps. But the writing fast can be really tough if you're used to a more perfectionist mode. And I was in that camp too when I first did NaNoWriMo. And that's why I wanted to shake things up. And I'll just recommend one of the things that we do when usually we have like 1,000 volunteers around the world who are organizing in-person writing events, and people write together, just like Aya mentioned that she did when she first did it. And one of the kind of games that is often done there is what we call a word sprint. And so the way that works, and you can do these at home or you can find them online. We actually have NaNoWriMo word sprints on our word sprints Twitter account, and they go 24 hours a day in November. But basically it's like, I would give you a prompt, and for 5 or 10 minutes, you would write as fast as you could. And what I find interesting is that every time I do this, it is such a different style of writing for me, but it's a really important, it's really fun. It's really amazing to me what comes out. It's per what Aya said earlier about quantity can lead to quality. I'm always just amazed that I can open up plot directions and character descriptions and wonderful stuff. A lot of it's mediocre or perhaps messy, but it's also, you can open up the things. And I think, you know, it's kind of like doing an occasional sprint. Even if you're a long distance runner, just take a break and do some sprints, and, you know, you've got to work those muscles too. So that's what I'd say, Naomi, and just kind of experiment with that. I think, who was it? Julia Cameron recommended people do morning pages first thing in the morning, and just to write and not even worry if you're writing complete sentences. So maybe something like that would help as well. Let me find another question here. They're kind of rolling in. Had one here. Jordan H asks, one of my bigger fears this year for Nano is that I'll go stir crazy. That's all of us have that fear. I think we're stir crazy to start. Usually when I'm tired of my house, I can leave and go to a coffee shop. I'm a coffee shop writer, by the way. But obviously that's not possible. How do you make yourself write when you're feeling a little tired of the walls surrounding you? Do you have any advice there, Aya?
That's a hard one. I mean, a lot of it depends on your physical space, you know, where you're living. I am a laptop person who, like, you know, I write in every room in the house and in my car. And, you know, if you have a car, sometimes that can be interesting. Like in the pandemic, go sit in the passenger seat of your car. It can be a little cramped. But just to have a different, you know, in your, whatever, the windows will protect you from COVID, and, you know, depending if you're on the West Coast, it may or may not protect you from smoke, right? But just, you know, anything you can do to change it up in like moving around, even within your house, if you have access to any kind of balcony, patio, outdoor space too. It's hard, it's true. Cafes really can be wonderful. And I think for cafe writers at this time, it's a big loss not to have those public spaces. But you know, that's the other thing for me about writing quickly. You know, if I really kind of hammer it out, I can hit my word count in like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then, you know, kind of have the rest of the day not to be crunched up. So whatever you can do to let go of the critic and just let it rip.
I love that car suggestion. I've been trying to get my family like to go on weekly little road trips just to listen to music, just to get out of the house. And my wife oftentimes goes out to our car to write. She's a writer as well. There's a long tradition of this. In fact, Raymond Carver used to get away from his family and write stories in his car. So your car is like, yeah, if you have one, it's like an extra room in your house, or it can be. Dee Dee Brown asks, what are some strategies or exercises you use to keep moving and decide what will come next in the story when you hit a wall or writer's block? This is actually probably the question, the ultimate question to answer for writers. You know, we all, at some point, will hit a block.
You know, so I think Grant really broke it down, but the two identities within the NaNoWriMo world are the plotters or the planners. I'm definitely a plotter planner, or the pantsers, the people who fly by the seat of their pants. Those of us who kind of have a really clear set of things to do, I'm kind of like, I just do it. You know, it's like, oh, this is the next scene, they're doing this, and I write it. And for me, blocks are less about an inability to write and more about an inability to accept what I'm capable of writing that day. Right? Because I'm always capable of writing something. But oftentimes it's just like really boring cliches. It's not inspiring. There's no tension. There's no conflict. I'm not interested in it. But part of what I've come to is just to be able to accept that, you know, 1,700 words is a good writing day, even if none of it I would ever publish because it's so mediocre and uninteresting. So I think that that's the first thing, really taking out the judgment. But then I also think, for me, some days what's happening in the story is not a comfortable emotional place for me. Like, it might be a really intense emotional reckoning between like the character and a family member, and I'm just not up for it that day. Sometimes I'll just skip ahead and be like, yeah, I don't feel like writing that scene. You know, I'm mad at somebody, so I want to write the scene where she confronts, you know, the jerky ex-boyfriend. You know, that's where my juice is at that time. So I think if you have an outline, you can really pick and choose the scene that you're interested in writing on any given day. There's no reason that you have to go in order. So I think, you know, I'd give that piece of advice. But I think for people who are pantsers, you know, I would really defer to you, Grant. Like, you know, for pantsers, when you get to that block, what do you do?
Yeah, I love your advice, because I think so often people don't give themselves permission to skip ahead. And I remember that moment of noveling when I was like, hey, I can skip ahead and write what I want to write. That scene of confronting the jerky boyfriend, yeah, that's calling to me. So, you know, you can go to what's calling you. And I think that can also refresh your creative juices for whatever's blocking you, gets things going. And I think that's what I'd say in general. I think there is, like, I think as a writer, you develop this sense of yourself of when you need to stick to it and grind it out and keep, you know, stay in front of your laptop and keep writing. But I think, like, a lot of times we hit those blocks, and it's because maybe we're putting too much pressure on ourselves and we're not opening ourselves up enough to the story. So I like to figure out ways to do that. And it's not like quitting, it's like taking a walk, doing something different, taking a drive, like we just mentioned, listening to music, whatever it is, just escaping your story a little bit. And it's like what they say about aha moments, how they usually happen in the shower. Well, you know, I think when you have a block, it's a type of invitation to an aha moment. I think you can't maybe go out and deliberately decide you're going to get it, but you can open yourself up to it. And then at some point, I do think, though, part of NaNoWriMo is about focusing on progress. So sit back down, keep writing your story, and you might have to solve this plot problem in your next draft, but just keep going and exploring, and it'll come to you. Got a great question all of the way from Pakistan, from AJ Bradley. And she asks about dialogue, how to differentiate well between voices of characters within the dialogue. She says, I struggle with creating distinct styles, especially when my personal thoughts echo in multiple characters' words. how do you write dialogue, Aya, to show that it's different people are speaking?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that for me, that's not a NaNoWriMo draft issue. That kind of differentiation is something that's for a later draft. In my NaNoWriMo drafts, all the characters sound exactly like me, that I don't even invest in that. Probably in my finished draft books, a lot of the characters sound too much like me and are not sufficiently differentiated. But I think it's also really interesting to explore how a story comes to you. So like my stories always show up in dialogue and plot action. I never, ever have any physical description of anything visual in my head in a first draft. It just doesn't come to me that way. I have to later go back to the draft and say, okay, they're somewhere. You know, like I might have said, you know, they're in a movie house, right? So then I have to force myself to have some sensory details and some visual descriptions. So, you know, I would say, however the dialogue comes to you in your first draft, just go with it, right? That level of fine distinction is not a first draft issue. It's maybe a second or even third draft issue. So I think for me, those are the kinds of things that will trip me up and slow me down. I just go with the voice, with the words as I hear them in my head, even if they're really kind of my voice.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for pointing that out. Here's a big question from Taylor Stoneman, who asks, would you recommend NaNoWriMo to someone who has zero novel writing experience but has percolating thoughts of trying writing? Do you think Taylor needs an MFA, or do you think he needs to read the 15 how to write books? Do you think you just pick up a pen and start writing?
Absolutely. And I think NaNoWriMo is great for that. And it's such a great equalizer, right? Because, you know, everyone writing a first draft is really equal, you know, like we're just plugging along.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. This is one of the things that NaNoWriMo exists for. We always say, so many people say they're going to write a novel someday, or so many people think that they're not a writer because they don't have an MFA, they haven't taken writing workshops, whatever it is. You're a writer because you write, and you become a novelist by writing novels. And NaNoWriMo, the way I describe it to people is one part writing boot camp, right? One part writing party. And so when Aya mentioned the 10,000 hours that she's put on to become, you know, a master writer, NaNoWriMo is the beginning of that. So don't put any obstacles between you and the page. Believe in your story. That's the other thing. Our mantra is that everyone has a story to tell and that everyone's story matters. So believe that your story matters and write it, and it's a gift to you. So, but thanks for asking that. Let's see, I'll find another question here. Brittany Campbell asks, do you have advice for authors who want to write their stories, but they are hard or difficult to relive or tell? So I'm assuming that this is more like a personal story. And I know a lot of people struggle with that because that can hold a lot of different, you know, traumas, or, you know, people don't want to feel that vulnerable to reveal themselves. What would you say to Brittany, Aya?
I think this is such a good question. And I think, you know, sometimes people are writing memoir, sometimes people are writing autobiographical fiction. You know, at some level, all of my characters have some piece of me in them because that makes me connected enough to them to want to write them. And some days I feel blocked because I've gotten to a part of the story where something really hard is happening to my character and something about what's happening to them is triggering me. And you know, I think those are the days where it's important to see something other than word count, right? Those are the days where it's important to have all of your tools around, you know, emotional self-care, mental health self-care. I think for those of us who are deciding to take on heavy topics, just really kind of thinking and planning ahead, just like I plan an outline, like what is in place for those days when I know that I'm getting into tough material. And so one of the tools that I use for my own self-care and mental health is, you know, I have a community of peer counselors that I'll reach out to, and like we'll share we'll each take a turn talking about what's going on in our lives and maybe what's hard. So I would say if you want to take on tough topics for NaNoWriMo, I would build in like every day, every couple of days, you know, who are your people who you're going to set up ahead of time, like, honey, can I call you at noon? You know, so you can kind of debrief. Because if you're writing about heavy stuff, you want to set up some kind of debriefing or some kind of release valve. If it's not talking to somebody, some other self-care activity that's going to allow you to kind of re-regulate yourself mentally and emotionally, maybe have that good cry. And, you know, to that end, building in cushions of time. I wake up early and I write till my kid wakes up, and then I got to start parenting. But if I'm working on something heavy, I need a buffer of time so I can use my self-care tools before I have to start kind of working as a parent or doing productive work. So I would, you know, I think it's a self-care issue, really important and a great question. Thank you for asking.
It is. You're right. Writing can lead to places that heal. Sometimes it can lead to places that are really tough to go to. So that's great advice to put in those cushions, I guess, to help one get through that. But I encourage you to write the story if you're ready to write it, if you're thinking about writing it. I do feel like sometimes people don't believe that their story matters, you know, or don't believe that they should go there emotionally. And I always say that, to me, of all the craft books I've ever read, you know, craft and fiction, yes, craft helps you tell a great story. But in the end, the stories that I love and that change my life and that I think about over and over again, they're the stories where an author really opened him or herself up, you know, and became vulnerable on the page. I really appreciate that kind of dare when authors are brave enough to do that. So I encourage it. Let me see, I had a question here and it popped away. That's the problem with the internet here. Let's see. Well, here's a question, and I'm not sure how much you research your novels. Mariella Reynosa asks, do you have any tips for the process of researching for a novel? I'm writing a story that takes place in classical Greece, and I'm struggling to find and organize all the information I need to know to bring the world and characters to life. I think it is an interesting balance between how much you research and how much of that ends up in the novel, and how the, you know, what the balancing act is. Do you research?
I do. I try to research as little as I think I can get away with. Now, the book that I wrote on the hurricane in Puerto Rico was my most researched book, because, you know, it was the first book coming out, and I, you know, as someone who's part of the Puerto Rican diaspora, I just felt an incredible obligation to my community. But even there, you know, I work with a lot of consultants and sensitivity readers. I kind of, you know, do a little bit of research, so I feel like the basic shape of what I'm working with has some grounding in reality. And then I just let my imagination do its thing. And then I check on the other end with sensitivity readers and consultants to make sure that I've, you know, reasonably represented the world. And, you know, I'm always getting feedback like, nope. And that's fine. And then, you know, I get that feedback early enough in the process that I can make small and sometimes big changes to the text based on, you know, things that are just not believable or not real. Now, what you're working with, when you're working with a big historical, with historical stuff, it can be a little harder, right? Because you don't want to go down one long plot, you know, thread and then find out that the whole thing that it's based on, you know, is not possible. At the same time, I don't know, like, I think writing should be fun, you know? And so part of it is like, what is the fun story that you want to tell? And if you're setting it in this place and then later on you find out this wouldn't happen, then maybe you would move it to a different place. Like, the most important thing I think about research is not to paralyze yourself and not to constrain yourself so much that you can't tell the story that you want about the character that you want to tell. So I feel like those are the two things that I would try and balance there.
Yeah, that's very important. I love your criteria of researching just as much as you need to get away with it, which I think is really good to keep in mind, because I think what happens with sometimes when with the people who love researching, they can love researching novels more than they like writing them in the end. They can use research as a way to kind of not write the novel, to always be researching it. And I think sometimes when you research so much, you also, the more you research, you feel a burden or an obligation to get all that research into the novel. So it can become too research heavy. And I think it's really important to remember that this is a novel. It's an imaginative act. And you've got to give yourself permission to imagine the story. And like you said, it's about the characters in the end and getting into them and following them. So that's great. Sorry, I've got a little cough. Robert Burpee asks, he says, I've got an idea, but I could take it in two radically different directions. Is it a good idea to just start out and see which direction it naturally seems to go? Or can I work with both concurrently? Do you recommend working with both two ideas concurrently in November?
I mean, I think it really depends on the novel. I think the most important thing for NaNoWriMo is hitting that word count. So you could go any number of ways. You could decide, I'm going to take path A and see where that takes me. I'm going to take path B and see where that takes me. If you felt, more of an affinity to one, you could take that one. You could also just alternate chapters, like on one day, follow path A, on one day, follow path B. And it may be that only by writing are you going to figure out that it is what you want or it isn't what you want. But in that way, I think that's one of the things that's great about NaNoWriMo. In that kind of way, there really are no rules. So you can just try both. And then you might end up with a novel that has like two alternative realities in it. And that could be an interesting novel too.
Definitely. I wanted to answer this question. I'll just take this one. A young writer, SK, wait, is this the one? Somebody was asking about where to find events. So I'll just answer that one in general. The 1,000 volunteers I mentioned who organize in-person writing gatherings in the community. So every year the in-person part happens. This year it's not happening, unfortunately. But when you sign up for NaNoWriMo on our website, go to the regions section and it says find a region. And so find the region where you live. Inevitably, I mean, we have them everywhere, so you'll likely find someplace near you. And this year it doesn't matter so much because you could join any region because they're holding all their events virtually. So people will gather like this on Zoom to write together or to get those, like do word sprints, like I said. And it's really, I just went to one in Des Moines last week, and I was so heartened because it was just as magical as being in person. I think, like, I felt the same types of bonds. I met interesting people. We did interesting writing activities. So I think it can be just as good and maybe better because more people have access to that. So give it a whirl. See how writing within a community works for you. I think we've got time for one more question. How about Gabriella Taylor's, who says, I've been a film critic for years and the analytical critical mindset is really getting in my way in trying to write fiction. Any ideas for moving between writing skill sets? And this reminds me, Aya, that a lot of times when I talk to writers, so the two biggest excuses I hear to not do NaNoWriMo, I'm too busy or I'm not a creative type. And I believe everyone's a creative type. So how do we help Gabriella find that creative type that she is?
So first of all, I have to say, I'll never forget the first time I taught when the women who were having the biggest struggles were the journalists because their minds had been taught like the lead, the font, and their mind was organizing ideas in that way, and it was hard to break out of that. I am a fan of drama and theatricality. So I almost wonder, and so this might work for you, it might not. One is just like, no plot, no problem. Give yourself permission for it just to be whatever it is. If it's awkward and stilted, that's fine for an early draft. But in terms of the theatricality, I don't know. Like, give yourself another name, create an alter ego character. Like, you've been a film critic, but then this is, I don't know, Sasha, the novelist self, have a funny hat that you wear that's like her hat or something like, whatever you can do you know, have a strange color of lipstick that you wear that's for lipstick. I don't know, but just something that you can do to differentiate for yourself, right in a different part of the house. I don't know what it would be for you that would make it feel like you were different, because really it's finding some other part of yourself to develop and embrace. So that's just like off the top of my head, something that I would throw out for you to try. And if it doesn't work, you know, just try and hit that word count. Even if it's awkward and your whole novel sounds like film criticism, that's fine for a first draft.
Yeah, you'll work with practice. You'll find that fictional voice. I love the idea of writing through a persona. Sometimes I think we should do more of that, because writing is, you're putting on your fictional self, which is different than yourself in other spheres. And I have a friend who, that's all, she only writes through a persona. It's very powerful for her. She can tell those stories she wouldn't be able to tell otherwise. So thank you so much, Aya. I want to mention that I noticed A Spy in the Struggle, which has the most fantastic cover of 2020, I believe. It's coming out December 29, 2020, which happens to be my birthday. So buy A Spy in the Struggle on my birthday. And
yes.
I believe,
and you can pre-order it on Bookshop.
that's right. That's right. And we have, while we're waiting for Angela to come up, I should say that NaNoWriMo has Bookshop lists. We've been making lists. So if you want to buy like No Plot, No Problem, or Brave the Page, this is a book that we wrote. We didn't talk about our teen program, but we have a whole kids and teens write 100,000 of them write novels every year, believe it or not. And so this is one of the books they use. And I will turn it to Angela. Hey, Angela.
Hey, Angela.
Again. That was so unexpectedly a balm for, if it was, I'm sure it must have been for so many of our audience here and in the future who will watch it as well. Thank you both so much. I'm going to go through a little outro rigmarole, but thank you. Really, that was so uplifting and affirming, and to you both for all your experience.
Thank you.
Unexpectedly, a little emotionally supportive, I think, more than.
Well, you can sign up right now, nanowrimo.org. Angela, I'm going to expect you to sign up and announce your novel tonight. I'm going to look.
Pseudonym, Aya, for you, only under the pseudonym. So I just want to mention again, everyone here watching, thank you for your questions. Of course, we had so many, we had dozens that we cannot get a chance to get to, and the ones that were submitted that were not answered. You can actually find a lot of the answers in the NaNoWriMo books from Grant. So again, that is Pep Talks for Writers and Brave the Page specifically for young writers. A lot of the questions that weren't passed on are answered in those books. And so thank you again for even submitting questions, and for everyone who did not get an answer as well. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to just mention one more time, the books featured here tonight are Pep Talks for Writers, and then Brave the Page by Grant Faulkner. Those are the National Novel Writing Month focus books. And then Aya de León's Side Chick Nation with that lovely cover in the back, as well as her upcoming Grant Faulkner birthday title, Spy in the Struggle, which you can pre-order now again on Bookshop as well. And the wonderful children's book, Quality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray. So all of those are going to be in the link we will share after this event in the email as well. And again, every order on Bookshop is directly supportive of independent bookstores. So I just want to ask you two really quickly, do you have any parting advice, kind of a sum up for our audience here tonight before we go?
You want to go, Aya?
Just trust that voice, that part of you that's always said, I want to write a book. Like, it's true, and go for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely my advice. That's what I think. When people either don't sign up for NaNoWriMo or they sign up and they quit, I think it's all about they talk themselves out of being a writer. They talk themselves out of believing in their story. And I think Aya mentioned this at the beginning when she was talking about NaNoWriMo, is it's all about jumping in, jump into the pool, take that risk. It's a gift to yourself. You got nothing to lose, and it's a gift to yourself, your novel is. So write it.
Thank you. Just for that is November. National Novel Writing Month is November 1st to the 30th. So that's why we're doing this early, in case you wondered.
And 24 days is the perfect amount of time to prepare to write a novel. Don't think you need more. 24 is perfect.
And if you missed any of this, also, you two, I want you to know this as well, but to our audience, again, this will be available on YouTube, on Bookshop's YouTube channel. This event has been recorded, so you can rewatch it again for inspiration when you need a little kick in the next coming weeks too. And of course, next time you do this again next year in November. So thank you again, Grant Faulkner, Aya de León. What a wonderful couple of humans. Thank you so much for your experience. Thank you, National Novel Writing Month coming up in November. And again, everybody keep writing, keep reading. Wishing you all a great November, especially this year. Thank you too.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bookshop. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Bookshop. We love Bookshop.
Oh, we love you too. Thank you. See you all soon, I hope.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everybody take care.